Hello, welcome to today's HR Huddle. I'm Tamera Loerzel, and with me is Jennifer Wilson. And our topic for today is succession. And we know that's been a topic for many, many years, but we also know there are still many people retiring in your firms and succession happening not only from retirements, but, as leaders, progress and continue to take on new roles or, replace people. That we just think it's important to stop and pause as one of the potential things our HR friends and our leaders within firms to really look at this spring to say, what kind of succession are we planning for this year? And looking out 2 or 3 years to say, what else should we be looking forward to? And, how do we get those plans in place and communicate that? And one of the things Jen and I were looking at last week was the Inside Public Accounting's statistics, the average partner rate and average age and the average managing partner age and the trends over the last 20 years. And it might be no surprise that the ages have been averaging upwards. There was a slight peak in maybe 2019-20 where it went down a little bit and kind of going up and down, but like marginal. And, we looked at that and had a few insights. And one of them was, first of all, it's continuing to, age up, and we need to look at, say, how do we create leadership opportunities for our young folks who, first of all, have lots of options that we've talked about before here on the HR Huddle, but also from a succession perspective, so that they can step into these leadership roles while the other parties are still there, while the former leaders are still there, and have that be part of the transition and really plan for that. We think that's important, from a handoff perspective, from a continuity perspective. We would caution to be careful that those, prior leaders don't block change or get attached to that's not how I did it. That's one of the risks, I suppose. But there's so much wealth of information and support, and often we have to transition other responsibilities at the same time. There's this domino effect for us to pay attention to when we look at succession. And so it was interesting looking at those ages when we looked at those, Jen, to say, hey, what are some of the things that might be telling us?
Well, one of the things I think Tamera and I were talking about outliers and outlying data, and there were some partners in their 70s, and and that skews the average age, obviously, when you have some sort of on the top end or the low end. We didn't see as many on the low end, by the way. We think that mandatory retirement date specified in your operating agreement is important. And I think usually that's sitting in the 65-year-old category as sort of the gold standard. Some firms have 62. We also recognize that, the population of the country is aging, and that means the over 65 population is growing at a rapid rate. And that, that may mean that we start looking at those retirement ages at some point if we find ourselves short leaders or short people. But presently, we think having a mandatory retirement date and age in place with a notice period is just a best practice. It provides for a healthy leadership culture. It allows for sort of living waters and young up-and-comers who are going to have a dog in the race later to come to the table and to influence strategy and influence decisions that will affect them for the long run, and to move people that don't have that long-term view out of the business, and or at least out of shareholdership, and to just really evaluate whether or not your firm has that in place, and if so, how well is it enforced? We know that there are a number of firms that they don't have really discrete transition periods, and so they don't say you have to give 3 years notice or you have to give 2 years notice. We believe in a notice period, and that you start the transition of shares, also start the transition of responsibility at a certain date or age. We think that's super important, and that just allows for us to make room at the top. And so those are just some of the best practices. Another thought I had, Tamera, as I was thinking about this subject, is the idea that some firms don't enforce transition and some firms don't enforce folks to go. And so, partners don't transition clients. And so then when it's close to their time to go, they get extensions and they get expansion on their time. And they say, well, I haven't had a chance to transition these key clients yet. I need a couple more years. Or they try to sell back services to the firm. There's all this different kind of I can't let go stuff that happens there at the end. And we see a lot of very loving firm leaders trying to figure out how to honor the long time investment and commitment of these partners that are at retirement age and balance that with the need to sort of say, hey, let go. And we think as consistent a business process as you could have, you could always make exceptions.
Right.
You had to for somebody who was just off the charts, incredibly valuable, super productive. But even then, I like the idea if I am going to keep someone on our team and have them sell back services, I'm not going to let them work on their existing clients. I'm going to move them off those clients so that we don't have a dependency. Because for as long as they're the server and the client's looking in their eyeballs, we have fragility and risk in that relationship. And so even if they're awesome and I want to keep them, I'm going to keep them for teaching or for reviewing other people's work on other clients that aren't theirs, or for mentoring, or some other technical support and advice on technical topics, but not for serving those clients they've long served.
Right. Yeah. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. And I think that's some other best practices to incorporate into your expectations and plans is, first of all, written notice with a proposed plan and how that transition looks over the next 2 years or 3 years. And that somebody owns managing that plan with the retiree, not the retiree, because it's hard to let go. Like that's a really almost cruel thing to do to the person that is supposed to be transitioning or letting go. But it's also hard to judge. And so we have to talk about what the expectation of transition looks like. And part of that input also needs to be the person that they're transitioning to. So if Jen's transitioning to me, I get to say, do I think it's transitioned? From a client perspective, or if I'm taking over maybe a lead role as a segment leader, or, maybe I have a role, in our, technical, group, but we have to get input about what that transition looks like. It's not just check the box. Yep, I did it. I introduced them. I did an email, but I'm still the magic 8 ball that's being shaken. And I reply to all the emails and I answer all the questions in the meetings. I'm still attending meetings, client meetings. And so, having that set up and specified, I think is important. And sometimes people will ask us, well, who should that be? And should it be the managing partner? Maybe it's a lot for the managing partner. It might make more sense to have it be maybe a member of your executive committee or board, or maybe you have a transition group and we rotate it, because that's the other thing. We can't do this in a vacuum. So Jen can't be transitioning to me. I'm her person. And then Bob thinks I'm also his person, and Jen and Bob are not talking and we're not looking at it globally. And we've seen that happen so many times. And then Tamara's like, I'm done. I cannot do this. It's not realistic. The expectation. You guys are not communicating and looking to see what you're really putting on my plate and asking me to do. And there's not that coordination of it that is needed. That's where HR professionals, I think, can step in and support that process as well. You might not be the only person. Maybe you do lead it and have, the executive committee input, but there's some place to define what that looks like.
Well, and Tamara, that ripple that you're talking about isn't just two of us trying to transition to one person at the same time. It's also, what if I transition all my stuff because I'm first out and I give it to you, but you're a technical expert on Bob's stuff and he's going to prepare to transition 2 years later. And by the time he does, you're full from all the stuff I gave you, plus all the stuff you already had.
Right.
And so then Bob's got to transition his highly technical stuff to someone else that isn't well suited. So there is a big picture strategic look with projected dates. One of our best practices for retirement is to have everybody declare their retirement date every single year, their planned retirement date, every single year, regardless of their age. So to get a 35 or 40-year-old declaring, And by the way, most of us declare when we're younger, we declare like, I'm not working a day past 55. And so our retirement age is really early. And we like that and can appreciate that. But that we also see those same people, because we've been doing this long enough, you have to catch those people as they're like 53 and they're all of a sudden their retirement age is pushing towards 60, So the closer you are to having to let go, the harder it is, certainly, or the sort of longer range your view. But declaring that makes it a best practice. One of the weird things we sometimes encounter is like they'll tell us we'll be doing strategic planning or something, and we're interviewing the partners, and they'll be like, I don't really know when Sue and Bill will go, but I think Sue's probably first. And they're busy sitting there handicapping it, like guessing. We're like, why don't you know? That's nuts that you are. And they're like, well, she's awful sensitive if you ask her. Well, come on, we're running a business here. We have to ask, and we have to plan and know and look at that big picture and kind of air traffic control this whole thing. The other thing that you mentioned, Tamara, is who manages it. Mm-hmm. And also you said, they need to present a plan for transition. And I love that idea, but I never see a retiree present a plan for transition. I know lots of firms who've asked. I haven't seen one yet. And so the person who's going to help manage their transition will help them produce their plan, because they won't produce one, or it'll be, like a very vague,
very plan. Straw man.
Yeah. You and I can write that at a happy hour on a napkin. You know what I mean? Like, we want the detailed plan with everybody. And it's not just clients we transition. And by the way, this isn't just client servers we're talking about retiring. We have a lot of operational people in this profession that are nearing retirement age. Really wonderful growth officers and marketers and HR professionals and, COOs and CFOs and all kinds of folks. And they're going to let go of some big jobs. And we need to transition those roles, and we need to transition duties kind of in blocks, skills blocks. And so if I am a client server, then I do need to think about my client transition down to the details of every single client name, and for huge clients, maybe engagement details, because we might transition the quarterback job for the huge client, but then each engagement is going to need to have a clear owner and a clear transition plan for it. So that level of detail. But also, if I'm a client server, like if you're transitioning Jen Wilson, you're going to transition a bunch of business development that I do, a lot of associations I belong to, a whole bunch of networking groups. I run decent chunks of the business, consultants that I manage. So it's not just clients. A lot of people think, well, we'll just build a map, and it only thinks about clients, and it doesn't think about all the other very important things those people are doing, and who will take them over, and how will we make them successful. And by the way, just like Tamara said, we want to get some headway on internal roles like service line leader. We want to get ahead of it, or managing partner, or niche leader, or growth leader. We also need to get ahead of external relationships. So if I'm going to transition referral relationships, if they're not at the same retirement age I am, then I need to be bringing somebody along on those a couple years ahead. Right. It's not just like 15 minutes before I leave. And if I'm going to get out of some of our networking groups or associations we belong to, where I've been a big member and it's been a big lead source for us, I got to bring other people along 3 years out, easy, or even further. And they should be there building their own relationships, and they should be speaking on the program, and they should be on the planning committees. And I've got to step back into the shadows a little bit on that stuff, so that when it's time for me to go, it's not just a surprise that I'm no longer there and everybody's trying to meet the new stranger from our firm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, super important. Well, Jen, you snuck a role in there that I think we should talk about, and that's managing partner. And, that takes some special planning. I think these all take really good planning, but we also have been talking to, several firms about managing partner transition, and really being methodical about that, looking at what your operating agreement says, by the way, because sometimes we miss that step or look at that step too late. We need to say, what are the requirements for us, from a voting perspective, and, definition and all of that. But then also looking at what are the expectations, for our managing partner into the future, because it's not the same as the managing partner that got us here. And we aren't trying to clone anybody. And that's for any retirements. We're not trying to clone them. Jen, you said like skills buckets or areas, of focus that, we need. And so we have to define that. What kind of managing partner do we need into the future? What kind of skills, what kind of responsibilities are they going to have? And then we think maybe almost more importantly, what kind of leadership attributes, characteristics, of our leader do we want? And getting input and buy-in, and maybe we would even say ranking, of those characteristics and attributes, and ranking of the responsibilities, by your partners. Maybe your key operational leaders should have input to that. And it's interesting when you go through that exercise and see what they say. And then how do we, craft a role, and not like this big 7-page job description, but here's the key responsibilities that are going to be expected so that we can talk about it and then find the right candidates. And sometimes we go about that a little bit backwards, I think.
Oh, totally. Not only that, but sometimes like I'm the managing partner and I pick my successor and I groom them myself and I tell everybody else who it's going to be. And Jen and Tamera come in a lot of times during a little bit of mayhem or chaos that causes. And we get engaged and they'll be like, I told everybody that we were going to have so-and-so be the managing partner, and, a mutiny broke out and now we've got this problem and they want an independent process. And, and so we tell managing partners all the time, please do not name your successor. If you do, we could almost assure you that unless you're the tiniest firm and you have the tightest trust with people, people will work to undo what you've said, even if that person is the very best candidate. There's something weird about, I don't want you to tell me who my leader is going to be. And if they own shares in the business and your operating documents allow them to vote, we want them to feel like they get to decide. And it's okay to prepare people for different roles as you go. You should be doing that. But dictating who gets to be the next leader, we beg you, senior leader, don't do that. And form a committee. If you're big enough to do so, form a committee that's independent of you. And if you're going to sit on that committee, just don't chair it, please. And maybe you don't get a vote. You're just going to be a voice of opinion and a touchstone for information. But don't make it feel like your process or we're going to have trouble. And then the people that serve on that committee, the selection committee, we'll call it, and it could be your current executive committee or your board, but the key is that people that want to run for the role, they can't be on the selection committee. So it's just too weird, and it's also has the potential, yeah, well, it has the potential to have conflict of interest emerge and get awkward. And so it's got, and the other thing is when we run into multi-office firms or multi-discipline, multi-industry, we would tell you your selection committee needs to be as representative as possible. We don't want it to just be isolated to, gosh, there's a whole bunch of auditors on there, or, and then also male, female, make sure there's diversity on that committee so that different perspectives are heard. And we just don't want to see anybody trying to manipulate or handicap that group, bias it to a certain candidate or a certain location or a certain discipline or something, because in general, that doesn't work. It won't be accepted by others. And so a light will be shown onto that, which would create a little distrust, a lack of feelings of trust and transparency to your process. And then folks like us have to come in and clean that up a little bit, rebuild trust of the group so they can feel good about their selection. So, and that's not the only time we get called in. We love to get called in at the beginning, and help frame it up and have you run it. But that's just one of the kind of the mistakes we see senior leaders make. We would call that in leadership, Jen and Tamera, mother knows best or father knows best, kind of running the business like that. And in general, that chafes at our future leaders. They don't like it.
Yeah. Very, very true. And, to your point about, we also like to be called in at the beginning, having that objective outside view to maybe ask some of these hard questions is important, because we can get maybe a little myopic. I do think that's one of the values about having, CHRO or CPO involved in the process, where you can be that, like, that you're a non-voting, input, but you can provide that even keel too. So I think those things are important to consider. And then, looking at candidates and having really honest assessment, straight conversations about it. We would like to avoid not having a big runoff, because it can get messy. It can be hard for the person that then doesn't get the managing partner role, and how do you preserve that individual? It can also get political or cliquey or something, inside of the business, and that's the job of the steering committee, is to manage all of that. And so the best you can do to define that, set that up front, say what your best outcome is of the process, will make a huge difference in how it goes and then where you end up. And so we've seen some be successful, but it's tricky. And again, depending on the scale, depending on how you've done it in the past, depending on your culture and the trust between the partners, there's lots of factors that play into that. So, as we're talking about succession, I just think it's really important to look at, the managing partner role as one to pull out, plan several years in advance, and, start having those conversations early as you look at that.
Yeah, and Tamera, we didn't get to talk about it, but I'm going to placeholder it here for us, so we can remember the next time we're thinking about topics. And that is the whole conversation around communication in transition. And it's not just in the managing partner selection process. There is big time communication needed there, but the communication all around any form of transition, to clients, to the talent, to within the firm and external to the firm, to the public, like when, how, all that. You tripped on it when you said earlier, they say they've told the clients, and sometimes that's one of the things they'll say, and the clients don't know, so how do we manage all that? So let's talk about that in the future. I think this was a good quick tour through some of the other setup.
Yes, perfect.
Succession.
Yes, noted. I think we will have that be a follow-on discussion. And if you have questions about it, succession or transition, anything like that, let us know, because we can incorporate that into a future HR huddle. And we are so glad that you joined us today. We will be on hiatus in respect of some of the key deadlines next week. So we'll see you in 2 weeks, and have a great rest of your peak period here. Support your people. And we look forward to talking to you in a couple of weeks. Thanks for being with us.